Hi, this is Erica Marilyn. I'm the founder of Perfect Legal Video, and I am very excited to have with us today Attorney Nicole Reeves Lavallee. She has a law firm out of Worcester, and she is fantastic. They handle everything that has to do with family matters and real estate. And you are going to love listening to her because there's always amusing conversations and interesting topics when it comes to Nicole. So thank you so much for joining us today, Nicole.
Thank you. We're going to take a little spin off of last week's meeting of real estate. And now that you bought a house, now what?
Exactly. And today we're going to be talking about one of the biggest headaches that is possibly out there, I think, and that is becoming a landlord. And, what does that mean? How should you handle things? So you just purchased a home with tenants, and I'd love to know, like, what should we review first?
Well, we're going to review before we even purchase the home. We're going to review the documents owned by the seller. So what does the seller have? Do they have leases for each of the tenants? We're going to request an estoppel certificate. We're going to request rent rolls. We're going to request leases. We're going to request communications and Board of Health issues. So we want to see all of that. So first thing we're going to do is before we even buy it, we want to make sure that we do a little bit of investigation. We need to know what kind of leases they are. Are they written or are they just, verbal communications? What are the terms? Do they have first, last, and security in there? What do we do with those things? Where do we want to look? What does the contract actually say? So those are all things that we're going to address before we even purchase the property. Obviously, you're going to go over that with your attorney so that you understand what you're getting yourself into. But we need to review those documents and then figure out whether or not we like those documents, if we can alter them, and if so, how.
I mean, that is great information. And it's really important not to try to do it yourself. I mean, I think any kind of real estate transaction requires an attorney. In my opinion, I know there are things that you can do on your own, but especially if you're going to be a landlord, you really need to be careful. Lots of bad things can happen.
Absolutely.
So security deposits are the first thing that I think of. I remember when I was a landlord, I had to take security deposits, and you could either give them. I used to use them as the last month if nothing had happened, because usually I was living there too, so I knew what was happening. I didn't have to do the walkthrough after. But what is your advice on security deposits?
Well, again, going back to if we're buying that property, we may have gotten the security deposit from the previous seller. And we have to follow rules, whether they're a new tenant or we're just acquiring this property, the same rules apply. So first and foremost, we need to put this security deposit, which cannot be more than 1 month's rent, in an interest-bearing account. We need to make sure all of the rules are followed. So we need to give the tenant a copy of the bank statement showing where the money is being held. We have to do that within a certain time frame. We have to give them a statement of conditions that says, as of the date you moved in or date I acquired the property, the apartment looks like X, Y, and Z. And we go through it and we say, hey, there's a hole in the wall over there. There's a damage or a dent over here. We have to acknowledge everything that's wrong with it. And those are the things that we need to do. In terms of getting one, absolutely, I would say do it. But again, do it after talking to your attorney and knowing exactly what you're getting yourself into. Because if you don't, there's going to be big headaches down the road that can amount to triple damages and attorney's fees that the tenant can receive.
Wow, that's amazing. And I know that those things happen for sure. So how do you handle the last month's rent when it comes to these rental properties and purchasing them?
So last month's rent is going to be transferred the exact same way as a security deposit would. If we have it, basically we're going to get that money. If the seller received $1,000, then we're going to receive $1,000. We're going to take it dollar for dollar. Security deposit has a little bit of a twist because we need to have that interest on it. But again, last month's rent is going to be allocated, and it's going to be on your CD or your HUD that shows exactly where that money was, how it was received, and then you're responsible for taking care of it according to the law.
That's really good advice. I think one of the problems that people worry about, and the first thing that comes to mind, is what if they don't pay? You hear all of these horrible stories about squatters and they just don't pay, but you can't kick them out, and they stay there for months or a year or whatever. And you have to go through a very long eviction process usually. What is your advice on that? Have you seen a lot of that?
Oh, I've seen too much of it. That's a simple story, is that it happens all the time. So again, the first thing is, again, we're looking at that rent roll. We want to know how long that person has been there before. We want to see the estoppel certificate. When did they move in? When was that first lease? Now, if they've been there for 10 years, my suggestion is always go to housing court and look them up and see if the landlord ever tried to evict them. Was there any action? So again, you can kind of do a little bit of your due diligence before you even purchase the property. But then after the property, you're kind of going, okay, first month, do I get my rent? Do I not? And it's always a very scary thing. My suggestion is the moment you don't get that first month's rent, you really need to take action. You really need to let the tenant know that you're serious about receiving the rent that is due at a date and time certain, and you're going to enforce those rules each and every time. So that would be my recommendation. Don't let it go 5 days late, 15 days late. Okay, now we need to do something about this. We need to let them know that we're serious and we're going to file a notice to quit if they fail to continue to pay rent on a timely manner.
I mean, I think that sounds reasonable, and surely you do have to enforce in a timely manner. Otherwise, they will walk all over you. You have to inspect what you expect, make sure that things are happening on time, and make sure that they're punished with fines and that sort of thing if they don't, and you give them the right notice. I agree with all that. And as you always say, put everything in writing. So when you're looking for tenants, and I know that there's no magic ball in how they're going to work out. I mean, I know personally, I had roommates move in that knew each other in high school, and they didn't work out, and they want to break the lease in the middle of it because one's a neat freak and one's a slob. I've had couples move in together. This is their first apartment. They don't work out halfway through. They want to break the lease. And there are lots of horrible things they do to try to guilt you into letting them. One of them said I was suicidal. And it's like, this is a bill. Like, I'm sorry you're not feeling well. I'm sure you've heard a million horror stories like this. What is your advice on finding good tenants?
I think the first thing you have to understand is this is a business, period. You have to treat it like a business. You have an obligation, most likely to your mortgage company, to pay your mortgage. You have to pay your real estate taxes regardless. You have to pay your homeowner's insurance. So you have to make these payments. If the tenant doesn't pay, guess who's paying it without their assistance? So the first thing is to make sure you're getting those good tenants. So how do you do that? You ask them for the history. So you ask them what their current landlord is. You ask them to contact the current landlord. You also ask them for the previous landlord's information. And more importantly, you're going to get lots of truthful information from the previous landlord and maybe not from the current landlord. My suggestion is also to run a credit report on them. You run a criminal background check on them. And most importantly, do a search on housing court and find out if they have been evicted for any reason. They will be able to tell you exactly why they were in housing court, what it was for. And then you can listen to their story. And sometimes their story is legitimate. Exactly what you said. We broke up. We split up. We had a disagreement. And, I moved out and the other person didn't, and they didn't pay the rent. And if you look at it, go through everything. My case was dismissed and the other person's wasn't. You're going to be able to get that facts But again, you have to start with, hey, so how many court cases have you ever been to? And then they say none, and you go, hey, look, I got 3 of them right here. You know that they're not going to be reputable. Again, most people are going to be able to explain it or try to explain it, but the point is they're at least being honest with you. So I think those are all very good things that you can at least hope that you did the right thing. Because again, you can't let this be an emotional thing. It has to be a business, and you have to treat it as these are the documentation that any business owner would need if they were having employees. It's the same concept. I'm having tenants move in. And you also kind of got to know if, what do they have in terms of, are they looking for a 2-bedroom except they're a family of 7? They're going to take up a lot of space. They're going to take up a lot of room, to the point that it may look like a hoarding situation just because of the quantity of people that are there. So again, you just want to make sure that you consider all the factors.
I know, don't get hooked in that emotion. So there are a lot of different types of leases out there. I know that there are, longer term ones, shorter term ones, and uh, you can move out and sublet sometimes. But the most important thing to know is which kinds of leases are there, and how do you as a landlord keep control over who's living there and for how long? So what types of leases are there, and what would you say about people trying to sublet and that sort of thing?
Well, the sublet is really easy. Don't do it. Don't allow it. It needs to be in whatever kind of lease you have. You need to have that sentence in there. You need to make sure that that's enforced on a regular basis, because you don't know what you're getting. You're pre-screening everyone. You've already done all the research we just talked about, so that you at least know that these people are going to hopefully be good. But guess what? Now when they bring their boyfriend in who's a criminal of 20 years and all he does is sell drugs out of the house, you're stuck with them if you allow something like a sublease. So you want to make sure that the lease is very specific, that it does not allow for any of those other things. In terms of what kind of lease, really depends on you and what you're looking for long term. If you have a property where you purchased it and you're inheriting these tenants, my suggestion is going to be do a month to month. You don't want to get in a situation where you don't know what you're getting into. Month to month allows you to go, okay, 30 days, I'm tired of you already, get out. And it allows you to do that. So that would be my recommendation if you're inheriting tenants. If you are going to be, looking and pre-screening and doing everything you need to, probably a year lease is the best avenue, because you don't want to be stuck in the dead of winter and going, great, now I'm paying the heating bill that the tenant's supposed to pay, and nobody's looking for apartments because it's the dead of winter and there's 10 feet of snow outside. So I'm going to suggest that, again, if you pick them, you want a year lease. And that means that they're going to stay there guaranteed that they're going to stay there for a year. And yes, they can try to break it, but you can also try to enforce.
I mean, that's really great advice. I hadn't thought about month to month being the top priority for inherited tenants. And I do know that I have a friend who's trying to sell a building right now, and she said one of the tenants is so horrible that she was actually trying to block the sale by saying nasty things about them in the building. And so she, basically threatened her, like, look, you can get out now or you can shut up because there's no reason for you. Like, they do a lot of background checking and inspections and everything else. They don't need one bad apple to ruin the sale. Do you see that sometimes?
I've had that exact same issue on one closing. We were at the closing table, and an hour beforehand, the tenant again started harassing the buyers, and the buyers were like, I'm done with this, I gotta walk. And we're going, what just happened? And then thankfully we were able to put it all back together, make it look really pretty, and we were good. And then we were actually at the signing table when the tenant sent a text to the seller Why the seller gave them the information, I don't know. But texted them and made some kind of comment that blew up all the deal. And so we had been to a closing twice. And at the end of the day, the property never sold because these tenants were just that horrible.
I mean, I have no words. That is terrible, because owning a house with tenants is like running a business, like you said. And this is like having fake bad reviews on there. And most likely they just don't like that you're enforcing that they need to pay on time. You're not giving them as much of a break as they think that they should have. It's just, you don't know. Half the people are on drugs, depending on what kind of property you have.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of problems.
So what would you suggest for the very best type of lease?
Again, I think it goes back to what we're doing with these people. I personally like the year to year, assuming you've done your diligence. I have a lot of landlords that say, I only want a month to month. I want to be able to kick them out at any point in time. And I think it depends really on where your location is, what kind of neighborhood you're in, that may define that demographic as to which one you prefer. But I definitely think it's a preference. I think the reality is, in a year lease, the biggest issue is you have a year lease. If the tenant pays, you have that tenant, good, bad, or indifferent, for that year. So it really boils down to, if we have that year lease, you can't evict them because they are harassing you. You can't evict them because they are asking to things be fixed every week. You can't evict them because they're having neighbors over and play loud music. It may be something that we could at some point, but none of those rise to a level of an eviction. So you really have to look at big picture, that you're going to most likely have those tenants that may not be good for that year period, regardless.
Nicole, we really appreciate all of your advice on this, because quite frankly, this advice could save people tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, if they are avoiding losing a sale by following some of this advice. And I mean, it's so tricky when it comes to tenants. And I know that from being a landlord. I know that you've handled so many cases. I feel like I've had almost everything happen to me. I've had somebody even squat and then go bankrupt, and I never got to get the money back, even though I won in small claims court. I mean, there's just so many things. So I would say that if you are considering buying a building, or you have a building and there's always something that comes up, absolutely give the law offices of Attorney Nicole Reeves Lavallee a call, because they are going to save you a lot of money in the long run, and a lot of headaches too. So thank you so much for joining us today, Nicole. We really appreciate all of your help and advice.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone for watching. Have a great day.